Under the cold, unforgiving lights of Willowridge, Rick, the arrogant HOA security guard, stood trembling, gun raised at Skyler, the sharp-eyed FBI tactical commander. "You think you're the FBI or something, threatening me? I'm the law around here." Skyler scoffed, drawing her gun without a hint of hesitation. "Idiot, you just threatened the wrong person. Drop the weapon if you don't want to regret it." The entire neighborhood froze in disbelief at the impossible turn of events. "What state are you in? Where you live? Is it really safe from those who think they're the boss?" Jake Nguyen stood neatly at the edge of the sidewalk, eyes following his daughter Skyler as she leaned against their sleek black Jeep, parked in front of their new home in Willowridge. The large HOA sign at the entrance boldly read, "Strict Security Control Zone," a cold warning to anyone who dared cross that invisible line. The fresh air of an early summer afternoon suddenly turned heavy and tense as the footsteps of a man in a reflective vest echoed across the cold concrete. Rick Brooks, a security guard for Willowridge, approached with visible caution, his face devoid of a smile, eyes icy cold. He didn't bother to hide his stern demeanor as he looked directly at Jake and Skyler, his voice rough and sharp. "No training-grade weapons allowed in the area. That rule is non-negotiable." His words weren't just an order, they carried the weight of authority. He believed he held authority granted by the HOA, a power he had never once questioned. Skyler, wearing a black tactical jacket with the word FBI stitched boldly on the chest, stood her ground. Her gaze was sharp, unwavering as she replied, "This isn't standard training equipment. I'm a tactical commander with the FBI. You have no authority to stop me." Her voice was like cold steel, filled with calm conviction, so firm that it left Rick momentarily stunned. Rick stepped back, sweat starting to bead on his forehead, his hand trembling slightly as he tried to maintain grip on the weapon at his side. He squinted, voice tense and defiant. "Around here, I'm the law. You think the FBI will protect you from neighborhood rules?" The air seemed to freeze around them, every word a sharp blade slicing through the rising tension. Jake stepped forward, his voice deep and serious. "Rick, lower your weapon now. My daughter is a federal officer. What you're doing is a serious violation of the law." But Rick didn't flinch, his eyes still locked on the gun, seemingly ready to confront anyone who stood in his way. As the neighborhood watched, people clustered in anxious curiosity. Skyler calmly drew her tactical firearm from beneath her jacket. She had no intention of pulling the trigger, but her sharp gaze and absolute composure were enough to hold the crowd at bay. She stood tall, unwavering, forcing Rick to hesitate. An elderly neighbor, a longtime resident, whispered to someone beside him, "Never thought a young woman could make that guard tremble like that." Meanwhile, Karen Wellington, the HOA president, approached from a distance, face cold, eyes locked on Skyler and Rick. She walked slowly, deliberately, clipboard in hand like an invisible weapon. "What's going on here?" Karen asked, her tone condescending. Skyler stared at her coldly without a word. Jake spoke up for his daughter. "Rick threatened her with a gun. That behavior is completely unacceptable." Karen scoffed, her voice thick with sarcasm. "Just because she thinks she's FBI, that makes her different? Around here, I'm the one who decides." The air grew tighter, like a storm on the edge of breaking. Seeing Karen behind him only hardened Rick's stance as he asserted, "No one stands above the neighborhood rules. Whoever you are, don't think you can act otherwise." Skyler looked him straight in the eyes, voice icy and level. "You just threatened the wrong person, Rick. Don't test me." Her words landed like an order, beyond argument, causing both Rick and Karen to hesitate for a moment. Everyone in the neighborhood felt the shift in that instant, like a turning point that couldn't be undone. The looks cast towards Skyler were no longer just curious, but laced with growing respect and unease. This wasn't just a personal dispute, it was the first tremor of something bigger, a quiet revolution stirring behind the silent walls of Willowridge. Across the street, a child stood on the sidewalk, watching the scene closely, as if it were a story he would carry for the rest of his life. The air seemed frozen, broken only by steady breathing and Skyler's unwavering gaze, a silent reminder that real power isn't in pulling the trigger, but in standing tall when challenged. Jake clenched his fists, stepped closer to his daughter, eyes full of resolve. "We didn't come here to submit, and we won't back down." No one could have predicted that in this seemingly peaceful neighborhood, a power struggle would ignite, sparked by a cold stare and a drawn gun, not meant to fire, but to warn. The afternoon was fading into evening, the last rays of sunlight stretching across the quiet streets of Willowridge, a neighborhood considered a model of order and safety. But beneath the seemingly peaceful atmosphere, a silent storm was waiting to erupt. Karen Wellington, president of the Willowridge HOA, appeared in the distance, walking steadily along the winding stone path leading to the management office. She wore a formal black dress that carried a sense of authority and chill. In her hand was a thick clipboard covered with documents, reports, and administrative paperwork. Each of her steps emphasized her position as the woman in charge of a system that governed not just the neighborhood, but the daily lives of its residents. She approached Jake and Skyler's new home with a sharp, unforgiving gaze. Standing before them, Karen spoke with cold pride. "I heard someone had the nerve to challenge the neighborhood security this morning." The air froze. All eyes turned to Skyler, the young woman standing silently beside her father, her eyes cold as steel. Skyler said nothing, holding her ground without flinching. She didn't need words to confront Karen. Her gaze said everything. Jake stepped forward, his voice deep, firm, and commanding. "My daughter hasn't challenged anyone." But Rick Brooks, that guard, overstepped his authority and acted in a threatening manner. His tone wasn't loud, but strong enough to command attention. Karen smirked, the sneer of contempt clear on her face. She spoke like a challenge, full of certainty. "This girl thinks being FBI makes her special, but around here, I'm the only one who decides what happens. No one challenges the rules of Willowridge but me." She slowly placed a violation notice on the table in front of Skyler and Jake, her stare unwavering, as if the paper were a sword meant to strike anyone who dared defy her. Possession of a replica firearm within the area is a serious violation of HOA policy. You are restricted from leaving your home for 14 days. Repeat violations will result in permanent suspension of residency, Karen said, each word cold and final. Skyler stood firm in silence, knowing that nothing she said would change the minds of those drunk on authority. Her gaze remained sharp, steel strong, untouched by fear. Jake turned to Karen, his voice rising with anger. "We will not accept your abuse of power to intimidate a citizen, especially not a trained federal officer. Your actions are nothing short of overreach and a threat to my daughter's safety." The tension was so high, every word he spoke landed with unmistakable anger and resistance. Karen simply smirked, dismissing everyone around her as if their voices held no weight. She stepped back a few paces, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with suspicion, resentment, and a growing fire of anger quietly burning in the hearts of Willowridge's residents. Each step Karen took echoed through the air like a silent declaration that she had never feared anyone, and this moment was no exception. But deep inside, Skyler and her father, Jake, were a flame of resolve that would not be extinguished. An elderly neighbor nearby, his face lined with age but eyes still sharp with clarity, whispered to a friend beside him, "No one expected a young girl to shake a powerful man like Rick. This isn't just standing up to one person. This is a community waking up." Meanwhile, Skyler didn't let her anger take control. She walked slowly toward the Jeep, her gaze locked on the group gathered across the street. She knew the fight ahead wasn't just between her and an overreaching guard. It was a fight to reclaim fairness, rights, and dignity for herself and for those silenced in this neighborhood. Jake stood beside her, placing a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder, giving her strength not just in body but in spirit. "We didn't come here to submit, and we will not back down from anyone," he said, his voice deep and strong like a bell calling others to courage. The nightfall in Willowridge no longer felt like a simple curtain of darkness. It had become a symbol of division and conflict between old power and the rise of the overlooked. This event, though small in scale, carried the power to shift the consciousness of everyone who lived there. From a distance, a child stood on the sidewalk, eyes wide and fixed on the scene, as if memorizing every detail for a story he would tell for the rest of his life. The air felt frozen, filled only with a fierce silence and the unflinching stare of a young woman, someone who rose with everything she had, not for violence, but to protect what was right and defend her own dignity. Jake knew the days ahead would be difficult, but in that moment, he realized his daughter had done something no one thought possible. She didn't fire a weapon. She used her eyes and her unshakable will to force this neighborhood to pause and reflect, and that, he understood, was real power. In front of Jake and Skyler's new home, the fading evening light cast a golden hue over the fallen leaves scattered across the walkway. The air, once quiet, suddenly turned suffocating as Rick Brooks, the security guard of Willowridge, abruptly drew a real firearm from his side, raised it toward the sky, then aimed directly at Skyler. His voice rang out with threat. "Drop the device now, or I'll shoot." The words struck like a final challenge, pushing the confrontation to its breaking point. Skyler stood firm, unfazed, her eyes burning beneath her black jacket marked boldly with FBI Tactical Commander. She calmly pulled her tactical firearm from its holster, her voice low and steady. "You picked the wrong person. I'm trained to handle men like you." Her composure was not just confidence earned through hard experience. It was a clear warning to Rick that every wrong move has a cost. Jake's voice broke through the tension like a siren. "Rick, put the gun down now. That's my daughter. She's FBI trained." His words were more than a plea. they were a sharp warning. Under Skyler's icy stare and Jake's commanding presence, Rick began to feel the weight of the situation he had created. But panic didn't fade so easily. Rick stepped back a few paces, still refusing to lower his weapon, caught between fear and pride. The confrontation had spilled into the neighborhood. Worried whispers spread. One by one, neighbors emerged from their homes, gathering in the yard, all eyes fixed on the invisible line being drawn. Willowridge was heating up fast. Every gaze was now locked on the clash between two guns, two individuals, and a much deeper fight: justice against abuse of power. Skyler stood unmoving, silent and solid like a rock in a rushing current. She didn't speak again, only breathed steadily, eyes locked on Rick's weapon, ready to react to any twitch. The tension wrapped around them all, stretching each second into what felt like eternity, as every breath was held in wait. Jake moved closer to his daughter, hand clenched, his expression a mix of concern and unwavering resolve. "Lower the gun, Rick. This move will cost you more than your job. It will put you before the law." His voice hit like thunder, shaking the guard's focus. Jake's quiet authority was the unseen weapon that began to make Rick understand the depth of his mistake. Outside, the chaos grew louder. Neighbors whispered. Some pulled out phones to record, murmurs mixed with quiet gasps and the occasional shout, all magnified by worry and disbelief. Everyone wondered, would Rick really fire? Would the FBI girl retaliate? Would she draw first? A middle-aged woman nearby shouted, "Put the gun down, don't do something crazy," but her voice was drowned out by the sharp echo of the raised weapon. Her eyes were filled with terror as she stared at Rick, as if she were seeing death standing only inches away. Rick stood frozen, his hand trembling, the gun lowering slowly but not yet fully withdrawn. A silent battle, thick with tension and calculation, played out in the locked gazes between those facing off. No one dared predict the outcome, only that in this moment, every ounce of Skyler's resolve, inner strength, and composure was being tested to its very limit. Skyler remained silent, her icy stare reflecting everything happening around her, a clear statement of unyielding determination. This was no longer just a personal standoff, but a symbolic confrontation, a young woman refusing to tolerate abuse of power, rising to defend justice and her family's dignity at all costs. Jake looked at his daughter, overwhelmed by a storm of pride and fear. He knew this fight wasn't just theirs, but a voice for the silenced, the isolated, those in the community longing for real justice. His gaze sharpened with the understanding that this battle was only beginning. Rick finally lowered his gun, but the tension hung in the air. People remained rooted in place, eyes shifting cautiously, waiting for what might come next. Skyler did not raise her weapon. She held her ground, denying Rick any chance to recover the upper hand. A light breeze moved through Willowridge, carrying with it deep sighs, and the weight of a crisis narrowly avoided. The eyes of those gathered began to change from suspicion to respect, from doubt to quiet admiration for Skyler. She was no longer just a young woman, but the embodiment of justice, determination, and strength. Murmurs started rising within the crowd, shifting from uncertainty to a quiet undercurrent of defiance. A wave was building within Willowridge, a warning to those who used authority to threaten and oppress. Jake gripped his daughter's hand tightly, nodding as if to pass on his strength. The silent standoff today would be the beginning of a long journey to reclaim respect, to rewrite outdated rules, to rebuild a fair and safe community for everyone. Meanwhile, Karen Wellington stood still in the distance, her expression tight with anger, but her eyes revealing something else: caution. She knew now that the path she had chosen was facing a challenge that couldn't be overcome with the same old tactics and forceful commands. Gray clouds rolled overhead, signaling a storm to come. Willowridge would face heavy waves before finding peace and justice again. Skyler understood that, and she was ready to face it all, not just for herself, but for the community she belonged to. Just as the tension in the air seemed to ease, it exploded again when Rick, furious and bitter HOA guard, shouted at the top of his lungs, "No one gets to cause chaos here. I'll show you what the law of Willowridge means." His voice echoed through the narrow streets, shaking the already stifling atmosphere. Rick's eyes flared with hatred, and his hand gripped the gun handle tightly, preparing for a confrontation he believed was necessary to defend the long-standing order and authority. The whole neighborhood fell silent, everyone anxiously watching every move between Rick and the young woman facing him. But Skyler, her eyes cold as steel, didn't flinch. She stood tall, her voice low and sharp as a blade. "I'm not afraid of you. You're just a small-time guard playing dress-up with a fake gun." Her words hit Rick like a slap of cold water, freezing him in place for a second, his expression flashing from confusion to rage. Skyler's confidence didn't just throw him off, it sent a wave of silent strength across the crowd. Her power needed no shouting, no violence. At that moment, Karen Wellington stepped forward, her face still unreadable. She stood in the middle of the crowd, her voice heavy with authority but laced with challenge. "Listen here, FBI girl. This neighborhood isn't for people who think they're better than the rest." Her words, sharp as a blade, were meant to cut down the defiance in Skyler's stare, but they only added to the growing sense of injustice. Karen wanted to make one thing clear. In her world, power and rules belong to people like her and no one else. Jake couldn't accept that arrogance or the injustice. He stepped closer, his voice deep, steady, and firm. "Miss Karen, Mr. Rick has no idea who he's threatening, and he will answer for it." His words were not just a warning, but a declaration of their right to justice and equal treatment. The atmosphere thickened further as he stood firm beside Skyler, showing everyone that they weren't alone in this fight. Neighbors standing around some who once admired Karen and the HOA began seeing things differently. Some remained silent, eyes filled with worry and regret, realizing their quiet compliance had allowed people like Rick to act unchecked for too long. Others started whispering, old stories of unfair treatment resurfacing, and the carefully polished image of Willowridge began to crack. Skyler held her stance, not responding with words but with the calm of a soldier seasoned by trials. She understood this wasn't just her own fight, it was a stand for all those who had been oppressed, discriminated against, and dismissed due to irrational biases in a community that claimed to be civilized. She knew true strength didn't lie in aggression or sharp words, but in steady resolve, mental fortitude, and careful preparation for what lay ahead. The confrontation between Rick and Skyler wasn't merely personal conflict, it was a symbolic battle between justice and abused authority, between residents and those who enforced rules with unchecked power. Harsh words, piercing glares, and Karen's looming presence turned the air into something unbearably heavy. Everyone stood still, anticipating something, an incident, a tipping point that could shift the balance of power in Willowridge entirely. Jake and Skyler, side by side like a symbol of endurance and resistance, stood not just for themselves but for all who had been suffocated by false authority and injustice. They didn't need speeches or noise, only truth and fairness, both of which Willowridge had lacked for far too long. Karen, though outwardly composed and authoritative, began to feel the growing pressure beneath the surface. She sensed that her control was being tested by a force she couldn't dismiss simply because it came without bluster. Quietly, she stepped back, though her eyes remained fixed on Skyler and Jake, knowing this battle was only the beginning. The air in Willowridge was no longer calm. Whispers, wary glances, and unease crept through every corner. People were waking up to the truth that a truly fair and safe community required them to stand against abusive power, even if it meant facing hard and uncomfortable conflict. Skyler didn't rush. She slowly reholstered her weapon, her gaze unwavering. She knew the path ahead would be long, but she was ready. Beside her, Jake gently placed his hand on her shoulder, lending her the strength and resolve to continue this demanding journey. In the darkness that blanketed Willowridge, a small flame flickered from the intensity in Skyler's eyes. That flame wasn't just a mark of one young woman's courage, it was hope for a community yearning for justice and truth. The standoff with Rick and Karen was never just about individuals. It was about dignity and fairness, a fight that many in Willowridge were now watching with growing hope and expectation. Across the street, a child stood still, staring intently at the scene. Their clear, determined eyes held a depth beyond their age, as if they understood the weight of the moment. The story of Jake and Skyler would not remain a personal one. It would become the story of an entire generation, of those willing to rise and defend what is right, no matter the pressure or the threats. The dim glow of streetlights filtered through the trees, casting shadows across stern faces, high fences, and the HOA sign etched with strict warnings. Willowridge, once seen as a flawless neighborhood, was now facing inevitable and profound change. And Skyler, the young woman caught in the center of power and prejudice, had become the torchbearer for that transformation. Neighbors gathered under trees, in shared courtyards, and along narrow walkways between the rows of homes. They stood there, timid and uneasy, their eyes fixed on Jake and Skyler's new house, where an unprecedented confrontation had just taken place. Among them, an elderly woman with silver hair and a weathered face whispered to the person beside her, "I've seen something like this on the news, someplace far away. Now it's happening right outside my door." Her words carried the weight of a quiet warning, a reminder that the world was changing, and Willowridge was no longer as safe as they once believed. The silence in the air was suffocating, yet it pulsed with an undercurrent of tension, a shared understanding that things would not simply end here. Suddenly, a short video clip showing Rick pointing his gun at Skyler, and Skyler calmly drawing her tactical firearm in response, began spreading rapidly across social media. The caption read, "You messed with the wrong one," a phrase that quickly became the talk of Willowridge and beyond. The video didn't just stir up outrage within the community, it spilled over into broader online spaces, where Rick's aggressive actions and the HOA's overreach drew sharp criticism. On Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, residents and outsiders alike shared their reactions ranging from anger and frustration to overwhelming support for Skyler. Some realized they weren't alone in their fight against abusive authority, and the story lit a small fire in the hearts of many, sparking a hunger for change. Human rights groups began to take notice as well, reaching out to Jake's family to offer legal and media support to help protect their rights. Amid it all, Karen Wellington, the HOA president, couldn't remain silent as her power and reputation came under threat. On Willowridge HOA's official social media page, she posted a firm statement: "We are committed to protecting community safety and will not tolerate any behavior that threatens order or endangers residents." Her words sounded like a declaration of war, aimed at reassuring loyal supporters while rejecting the growing criticism over the HOA security team's abuse of authority. Meanwhile, Skyler maintained her mysterious and unwavering silence. She refused to give interviews or respond to any questions from the press or online media. She knew that speaking now would only complicate the issue and weaken the strength of the calm defiance she was embodying. But the image of her holding that gun, eyes cold and steady without hesitation, had already gone viral, becoming a powerful symbol of resistance and the quiet strength of those who rise to defend what's right. Many residents in Willowridge began to feel confused and uncertain. Some feared for their own safety, while others questioned whether the powers they once trusted truly protected them or merely served as tools of oppression. The story between Skyler and Rick had become the center of every conversation, debate, and deep reflection on power, responsibility, and justice. Karen was not one to surrender easily. She began ramping up control measures, increasing patrols, tightening regulations, and urging residents to strictly follow neighborhood rules. But every move she made only deepened the division and resentment within the community. Willowridge residents, once silent and submissive, had now begun to raise their voices, demanding greater transparency and fairness from their leadership. In long, sleepless nights, Jake and Skyler reflected together on what had happened and on the uncertain future ahead. They knew this wasn't just a personal conflict with Rick or Karen, it was a fight for the rights of all those who had been oppressed, dismissed for being different, or punished for daring to challenge an outdated, unjust system. They both understood the road ahead would be long and hard, but they could not, and would not, back down. In front of their home, beneath the dim glow of the streetlights, Skyler stood silently, gazing into the star-filled night sky, filled with a sense of strength and resolve she had never felt so clearly before. She didn't need words to prove her place, didn't need violence to assert her presence. Her silence, her cold gaze, and her steady calm were the most powerful responses to those who thought they could impose their authority without question. Jake stood beside his daughter, pride in his eyes, tempered by a quiet sorrow. He knew this story wouldn't end here. It was only the beginning of a long journey, not just to protect their personal rights, but to reshape the thinking, awareness, and behavior of a community once proud of its order, yet filled with hidden shadows waiting to be exposed. As they stepped inside their home, the darkness of Willowridge still lingered, but the small light born from determination and justice would be a fire that could not be extinguished, lighting the path ahead for all who dared to stand up and fight for themselves. In less than a day, the video capturing the intense standoff between Skyler and Rick Brooks spread rapidly across social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, reaching over 3 million views. People didn't just watch it as a viral moment, they shared it widely, accompanied by outraged and concerned commentary. An HOA abusing power to the point of threatening a citizen at their own home, many wrote, expressing deep concern over the unchecked authority held by the HOA system. A well-known YouTuber specializing in legal and social commentary quickly posted an analysis of the incident, intensifying public reaction. He spoke in a sharp, critical tone, stating, "That girl, Skyler, didn't need to fire a single shot. Just standing there, unmoving, was enough to make the oppressor back down in fear. This isn't just a personal fight, it's a warning to anyone who abuses power to crush others." His words lit a fire in the hearts of those who had felt wronged or silenced, amplifying the momentum of the movement. Beyond sharing content, residents and online supporters created a private chat group to defend citizens' rights and protest acts of overreach and intimidation, not just from Rick, but from the HOA leadership as a whole. The group quickly gained thousands of members, organized discussions, and called for legal and media action to pressure the HOA into accountability. This wave of solidarity was not only a form of resistance but a symbol of the community's awakening. Meanwhile, Karen Wellington could not ignore the growing backlash. She issued an official statement on the Willowridge HOA's social media page, denying all allegations. In her post, Karen wrote firmly, "We prioritize community safety and order above all else. Any acts of threat or disruption are handled seriously. The rumors and edited videos meant to stir chaos and damage the management's reputation are completely false." Her statement appeared aimed at defending both her image and that of the organization, while also trying to undermine ongoing investigation. However, rather than calming tensions, Karen's post became a flashpoint for even greater outrage. Many residents and outsiders pushed back, pointing out inconsistencies in the HOA's actions and demanding real transparency and justice. Advocacy groups for residents' rights grew rapidly in size and influence, forming a powerful counterforce driving change from within the system. On major news sites and discussion forums, the story of Willowridge and the standoff between Skyler, the FBI agent, and Rick, the HOA security guard, became a hot topic of ongoing debate. Numerous articles, interviews, and quick response documentaries quickly emerged, spreading the story beyond the confines of the small neighborhood and creating a broader social wave. People began paying attention to the powers held by residential organizations and to the issues of overreach and discrimination in everyday life. Public reaction moved beyond outrage and frustration to serious questioning of how organizations like HOAs operate and the extent of their authority. Skyler's story was no longer just that of one family. It became the shared narrative of thousands living in overregulated communities, subjected to unclear and unjust rules. Though Skyler remained silent, refusing interviews or public statements, the image of her calmly holding a firearm, composed and unshaken, became a symbol of defiance and resilience. The photos and videos circulating across social media served as a powerful reminder that no one has the right to use force or authority to intimidate and oppress without being held accountable. At the same time, in online groups, people continued sharing similar stories, personal accounts of oppression, and a growing desire for reform. Some began calling for movements to protect civil rights, urging lawmakers to regulate and oversee residential organizations more strictly to prevent more painful stories like the one unfolding in Willowridge. People started looking to Skyler as a figure of fairness and justice, not because she wore a badge or carried a gun, but because she had the courage to stand up for truth and her right to exist with integrity. Meanwhile, members of the Willowridge, HOA, and Karen Wellington could feel the shift in power. The growing pressure from both the community and the media was beginning to threaten the authority they had long taken for granted. Within that atmosphere, closed-door HOA meetings became more tense than ever. Divisions emerged among board members. Some pushed for reconciliation and reform to salvage the situation, while others stood firm, unwilling to concede or admit fault. The story had become more than a personal conflict. It was now a psychological and political struggle that would define the neighborhood's future. While public attention intensified, Skyler and her family remained focused on their plan to defend their rights and pursue fairness. They understood that reforming a system couldn't happen overnight, but with every step they took, they were building a wave strong enough to transform Willowridge and inspire change in similar communities across the nation. On online forums, many people began asking themselves a hard question. Are they truly living in a safe environment? Are their rights being infringed upon by self-appointed organizations? Skyler's story became a wake-up call, forcing people to reconsider their place within their communities and, more importantly, to realize that justice is not something guaranteed, but something that must be fought for and defended. The spread of the video, images, and narrative turned Willowridge into a symbol of the fight against abuse of power, racial bias, and oppression in modern life. Skyler was no longer just a girl standing alone in front of Rick. She had come to represent the strength of fairness, the resilience of those who endure, and the courage of those who refuse to bow to injustice. As night fell over Willowridge, the air grew darker, but the fire of resistance within its people, within Skyler and her family, burned brighter than ever. They knew the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, but they also knew that truth and justice would always find a way forward, even when temporarily obscured. In the days following the viral spread of the video showing the confrontation between Skyler and Rick Brooks, Willowridge was no longer the quiet residential neighborhood it once was. Conflicting reactions began to emerge, creating a tense atmosphere that everyone could feel. Some longtime residents of Willowridge, who had supported Karen Wellington and the HOA board for years, quickly spoke up in her defense. They posted in internal neighborhood social media groups with persuasive language, arguing that Skyler and Jake had overreacted and caused unnecessary disruption to the community. These individuals believed that safety and order in the neighborhood mattered more than any individual, and that newcomers like Jake's family shouldn't impose their views on everyone else. They called the incident an unprecedented shock, but insisted that Karen and her team were simply doing their job to maintain order. Meanwhile, a group of teenagers in the neighborhood began speaking out with a different perspective. They organized small discussion circles to talk about personal freedom within the community and the right to control one's own life. One teen said, "This isn't just a story about a gun, it's about who really has the right to control our lives. We can't let older generations impose everything on us through blind rules." The emergence of young, passionate voices added even more heat to the ongoing debate. At the same time, video interviews conducted by independent journalists began capturing clear evidence of discrimination between new arrivals like Jake and Skyler and the older, long-established residents. Some longtime residents openly admitted they had never accepted the newcomers, referring to them as outsiders, and that HOA rules were designed to preserve culture and order for a select group, not for everyone. These testimonies sparked outrage and exposed hidden tensions that had been buried for years. Jake's family began receiving anonymous threats via phone and email. The messages were often warning in tone, with implied consequences if they didn't back down or stop speaking out. The increase in these threats only heightened the tension in the area, forcing the family to live with constant caution and unease. Still, Jake and Skyler refused to let the intimidation weaken their resolve. They knew that standing up for justice and truth required facing real risks and challenges. Within the community, the divide became clearer than ever. Supporters of the HOA felt betrayed by the new voices, while those backing Jake and Skyler saw the HOA's response as proof of authoritarianism, abuse of power, and racial bias. Debates surged across social media, often turning into fiery arguments, at times threatening to cause deep fractures in what once seemed like a close-knit neighborhood. Local media quickly caught up with the unfolding developments. Numerous feature stories were published, interviewing the involved parties with a tone that remained objective yet sharp. Local television stations dedicated full segments to analyzing the incident, drawing large viewership, and sparking public debate over HOA authority, civil rights, and the abuse of power. Meanwhile, Karen Wellington showed no signs of backing down. She actively used the HOA's media channels and social platforms to issue statements denying all accusations, calling them fake news and acts of sabotage intended to destabilize the community. She also announced plans to sue those who shared the video and critical articles for defamation and for damaging the reputation of the HOA. Her statement only fueled greater outrage from opponents, intensifying the debate and pushing it further into a bitter standoff. As tensions continued to rise, community groups began organizing gatherings to discuss next steps for protecting residents' rights. Some members proposed forming independent oversight committees to ensure transparency and fairness in HOA operations. These meetings not only helped rebuild fractured relationships, but also generated a new force strong enough to push back against abuse and oppression. Jake and Skyler's family took an active role in these efforts, consistently calling for unity and responsible action from everyone involved. They knew that only a collective effort could bring about real change, and they were determined to lead the charge in the fight for justice. On quiet evenings in Willowridge, Jake often sat by the window, watching over a neighborhood slowly transforming. The glow from windows, the soft laughter of families, and the quiet undercurrent of unrest still lingering in people's hearts reminded him that the fight wasn't over. But he also believed that the light of justice was beginning to pierce through the shadows of power and injustice. Skyler, the young woman with sharp eyes and an unyielding spirit, continued to stand firm. She was not only the one who stood tall in a direct standoff with Rick, but also a symbol of change, a source of inspiration for those fighting for fairness. She knew every step she took was not just for herself, but for the future of the entire Willowridge community. The story of Skyler and Rick, of HOA overreach and community resistance, had become a symbol, a powerful reminder of the strength found in persistence and unity. It was no longer just the story of one small neighborhood, but a reflection of similar struggles happening around the world, where the oppressed choose to stand up and refuse to be silenced or controlled by any force. The atmosphere in Willowridge grew increasingly heated, spreading across social media and into public conversations. A short interview clip of Skyler went viral on TikTok, capturing her firm and resolute words, "I didn't come here to fight, but I won't back down from oppression." That simple yet powerful statement quickly garnered millions of views and shares, becoming a symbol of resistance against injustice and abuse of power, leaving a lasting impression on all who heard it. However, as attention focused on Skyler and Jake's family, hidden forces began launching attacks to undermine her image. A fake social media account circulated false claims that Skyler was abusing her FBI affiliation for personal revenge, fueling division within the community. These rumors not only eroded trust among newer residents, but also deepened fractures within Willowridge, making the divide more pronounced. Amid this growing tension, the HOA board under Karen Wellington escalated its control measures, especially tightening regulations targeting new residents. Closed-door meetings were held regularly to discuss and implement policies aimed at limiting Jake's family's rights and freedoms. These decisions slowly transformed Willowridge into a place where difference and new ideas were seen as threats to be eliminated. The conflict reached a boiling point when Rick was caught intentionally locking the garage door of Jake's home late one night, an incident that was reported to local police. This act, clearly rooted in personal retaliation, revealed the simmering resentment among those defending the old system. The incident was quickly picked up by the media, drawing even more public attention and outrage. Resident meetings grew more heated than ever, with fierce debates erupting between those who supported Jake's family's rights and those who stood by the strict order of the HOA. The tension was so palpable that walking down the street felt like walking a tightrope. Despite being at the center of the conflict, Skyler remained calm and focused. She didn't engage in arguments or respond to baseless accusations, instead choosing to continue her fight through steadfast action. She knew that the greatest strength wasn't in speaking louder, it was in standing firm, letting actions prove the truth, and allowing justice to speak for itself. Jake stood beside his daughter, watching the events unfold with a mix of worry and pride. He understood the road ahead would be difficult, but nothing could break their resolve, especially with growing support from others in the community who shared their sense of injustice. The story of Skyler and Jake's family was no longer just a personal battle. It had become a symbol of resistance against oppression, abuse of power, and prejudice. It awakened a sense of civic awareness, justice, and the desire for social change, spreading from a small neighborhood to wider public platforms. Meanwhile, Karen and her allies continued to tighten their grip on power, using every tactic available to maintain control, from managing information to holding closed-door meetings to push harsher policies. The confrontation between both sides was no longer simply a power struggle. It had become a battle of values, where each tried to prove they held the authority to shape the community's life and future. Under the night sky in Willowridge, the dim streetlights cast soft glowing circles, illuminating tense faces and eyes that closely followed every development. The fight between justice and authority was never going to be easy, but for the people of this neighborhood, it had become part of daily life, a constant reminder of the value of freedom and fairness. The spread of the video, images, and story drew attention from outside the neighborhood. Numerous social and human rights organizations sent open letters and offers of support to Jake's family, helping elevate the Willowridge issue to a national level. It was a turning point, shifting the narrative from a local incident to a broader societal concern and sparking discussions about power and abuse in other communities. Skyler knew that despite growing attacks and division, she couldn't stop. Each passing day was a chance to keep fighting, to make sure silenced voices were heard and justice was served. She was not alone in this journey. Behind her stood the people of Willowridge, now awakened and ready to rise for change. Without saying a word, Skyler's presence and unwavering resolve had become a spreading force, igniting hope in those who once felt powerless. By standing still and unafraid, she sparked belief that justice would prevail over oppression, no matter how long or difficult the path might be. Jake and Skyler received an invitation from the Willowridge District Police Station to provide information related to the incident in which Rick Brooks had threatened Skyler with a firearm in front of their new home. They arrived with a video recording of the entire confrontation, undeniable, vivid evidence. The police documented every detail, every moment, from the second Rick drew his weapon, to Skyler's composure, to the neighbors' reactions. Both father and daughter cooperated fully, answering each question with absolute clarity and precision, hoping the truth would be brought to light. Shortly after, the district police officially launched an investigation into Rick Brooks's use of a weapon to issue threats. Rick was summoned for questioning, but clearly avoided cooperation. He remained silent and refused to answer key questions. His silence did not lessen the police's suspicions, it only strengthened their resolve to uncover the truth. Intense exchanges between Rick and investigators continued, as officers tried to extract information about his motives and whether the HOA board had any role in the incident. At the same time, Jake and Skyler became protected subjects under the attention of civil rights organizations. They were supported by professional attorneys who quickly began gathering further evidence and building a legal case to defend their rights and ensure their safety. The family's daily life continued under growing pressure, as they navigated the complexities of the legal system and endured ongoing tension from the entrenched forces they were challenging. Rumors, pressure, and acts of intimidation from the HOA escalated. Threatening phone calls, covert surveillance, and social isolation within the neighborhood forced Jake and Skyler to remain highly vigilant. Yet they refused to let these tactics shake their belief in truth and justice. On the contrary, the mounting pressure only deepened their determination to bring the case into the light and hold those abusing their power accountable. District Police continued working with all involved parties, interviewing residents and witnesses to strengthen the investigation. Long sessions with Rick yielded few results due to his stubborn silence and the protection he received from certain influential individuals within the HOA. Still, through persistence and professional rigor, the investigative team gradually pieced together a clearer picture of misconduct and serious violations committed by Rick and the HOA leadership. Within the community, news of the investigation spread quickly. Residents of Willowridge began to understand the true depth and gravity of the case. It was no longer just a personal dispute, but a matter of safety, rights, and justice for the entire neighborhood. Support for Jake and Skyler steadily grew, with more frequent meetings and discussions forming around how best to assist their cause. At the same time, the HOA's resistance became more aggressive. Karen Wellington used every connection and influence she had to pressure the police, even threatening to sue those who spoke out against her. But these tactics did nothing to weaken the resolve of law enforcement and the justice-minded members of the community. Solid evidence from the video and eyewitness testimonies brought the case to the forefront of high-level discussions within the local legal system. Emergency meetings were held to assess the severity of the violations and determine appropriate punitive action. The incident was no longer seen as isolated. It had become a symbol of the broader fight against abuse of authority and the defense of civil rights. Jake's family continued receiving support from social organizations, legal advocates, and the online community. They became role models for those brave enough to confront injustice, inspiring many others facing similar abuses. The strength of collective action began to take shape through peaceful protests, coordinated media campaigns, and legal initiatives that aimed to expose wrongdoing and demand reform. Although the legal battle ahead remained long and difficult, Jake and Skyler did not feel alone. The solidarity and encouragement from the community, combined with their own steadfast courage, carried them through the hardest moments and marked a turning point in the push to reform the HOA and its system of governance. Meanwhile, Rick became increasingly isolated, both professionally and socially. Former supporters began to question him, some even speaking out against his misconduct. His silence and avoidance were no longer effective strategies, as more details emerged under the scrutiny of law and public opinion. The story of Jake and Skyler stood as undeniable proof of the power of truth and justice, showing that while power may intimidate for a time, it will ultimately fall to those who persist in standing for what is right. This event marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the voices of residents were heard and respected more than ever. People in Willowridge began to realize that protecting the rights and safety of the community was not just the duty of the HOA board, but a shared responsibility. The spirit of unity and civic awareness grew stronger, becoming the foundation for lasting change in the neighborhood. Skyler and Jake were no longer just catalysts for change, they became symbols of perseverance, courage, and conviction. They had proven that even when faced with pressure and danger, those who hold fast to truth and justice will ultimately prevail. Karen Wellington appeared at the Willowridge police station with a confident demeanor, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of tension. She brought with her a thick folder of documents, including internal HOA files and incident reports related to the case. During her meeting with investigators, Karen tried to argue that Rick Brooks had merely followed the board's directives, that his actions were in line with established procedures, and were intended solely to maintain neighborhood order. She emphasized that Rick had no intent to harm anyone and presented records showing he had completed internal security training organized by the HOA. However, her explanations failed to fully convince the investigators. They posed sharp questions about the legitimacy and legality of the HOA's internal protocols and debated whether such instructions could justify the use of a weapon in any context. Pressure mounted as law enforcement recognized a clear gap between the authority the HOA had assumed and the boundaries defined by actual law. While Karen tried to maintain her position, Jake's family was contacted by a well-known civil rights attorney from the region. The attorney expressed deep concern about the incident and offered legal support to protect Jake and Skyler's civil rights. In addition to legal counsel, the attorney pledged to help the family use media outlets to shed broader light on the story and apply pressure to hold the right people accountable. Through a series of serious working sessions, the legal team collected additional evidence, witness statements, and related documents to build a solid legal case. They also proposed a communication strategy to clarify the true nature of the incident and counter any attempts to smear the family's reputation. At the same time, In the Willowridge community, supporters of Jake and Skyler began organizing private meetings to discuss ways to support the family and advocate for changes in the HOA's structure and procedures. These groups quickly expanded in both size and influence, drawing in residents who had previously remained silent or indifferent. They agreed that abuses of power and unlawful threats could no longer be tolerated, especially in a community where every individual deserves fairness and respect. Discussions around legal rights and civil liberties began attracting the attention of outside advocacy groups, with human rights organizations stepping in to support the family on multiple fronts, from legal to media outreach and emotional support. The collective power of this movement began to take shape, creating undeniable pressure on the HOA leadership and those directly involved in the incident. Karen Wellington, despite her efforts to defend Rick and preserve her own authority, found herself confronting a growing storm of scrutiny and pressure from investigators, the media, and the community. Her internal plans and HOA documents were increasingly examined with detail, no longer shielded by the cover of bureaucratic opacity. She began to realize that this legal and media battle was no longer just about protecting her reputation, it was about holding on to a position of power that was now rapidly slipping from her grasp. Jake and Skyler's family stood at a crucial crossroads in their lives, facing not only complex legal challenges, but also the responsibility of maintaining resilience and unity within their community. They understood that justice isn't won in a single moment, but through a long and relentless process of struggle, where truth and perseverance become the most powerful weapons. In private conversations, Jake and Skyler often reminded each other of the need to stay vigilant and clear-headed against any schemes meant to divide or weaken their resolve. They believed in the fairness of the legal system and the strength of collective support, remaining determined not to let abuse of power discourage or derail their pursuit of justice. This incident was no longer just a local matter in Willowridge, but a defining moment, sparking widespread discussions about power, responsibility, and fairness in modern society. It awakened a shared awareness that injustice cannot be tolerated in silence, and that people must rise and fight back, using every legal and moral tool available. In the days that followed, Jake and Skyler were invited to meetings with human rights groups, lawyers, and community representatives, where they shared their story and called for stronger support. Their experience inspired many, especially those who had suffered from abuse of authority or discrimination, to speak out and stand up for their rights. Through close coordination between legal channels, media outreach, and community solidarity, Jake's family gradually built a solid foundation to challenge injustice and push for meaningful reforms in the HOA and similar organizations. The legal battle was no longer just personal, it had become a fight for a more just society, where everyone's rights are protected and respected equally. Their determination and perseverance earned admiration from many. They continued to press forward through the challenges ahead, supported by public pressure and advocacy groups that helped keep their spirits strong. In legal hearings and investigative meetings, the abuses committed by Rick and the HOA were gradually exposed. Authorities pledged to take firm action and ensure residents' rights were upheld. The evidence gathered by Jake and his attorney became a solid base for the next legal steps. Despite mounting pressure and hardship, Jake's family held on to their belief and purpose. They knew that justice was not just for them, but for the thousands of others oppressed by similar systems, and they were ready to become the voice for those who couldn't speak up. One early autumn day, as the sunlight began to soften, a local investigative journalist named Min Long decided to visit Jake at his family's new home in Willowridge. The story of the confrontation between Skyler and Rick Brooks had become a hot topic across social media and news outlets, but Min Long wanted to dig deeper into the long-standing problems in the HOA's management. He asked not only about the shocking incident, but also wanted to hear directly from Jake about the hidden issues residents had endured, the unreasonable impositions, the discrimination, and the way the HOA wielded power to control every corner of their daily lives. Jake answered with a calm, low voice, each word carrying the weight of exhaustion yet never lacking resolve. He spoke about being monitored, fined without explanation, about unfair rules applied unevenly between longtime residents and newcomers, and most of all, about the day of the incident with Rick Brooks. He stressed that the event was not just an isolated act by a single guard, but a clear symptom of an unchecked, abusive system within the HOA. Jake shared his deep disappointment that those meant to protect residents were the very ones violating their rights and safety. Immediately following the interview, local news outlets began publishing a series of in-depth investigative reports focused on the long-standing tension between residents and the Willowridge HOA leadership. These reports examined not only Rick's act of pulling a gun but also exposed racist behavior and the arbitrary enforcement of rules. Using video evidence, witness statements, and internal HOA documents, the articles drew widespread public attention. The reports raised serious questions about transparency and fairness in neighborhood governance, about the scope of power given to residential organizations, and the consequences when that power is abused. They sparked a wave of public reaction that pressured officials to take a closer look at how Willowridge's HOA operated. At the same time, they helped raise community awareness about civil rights and the legal boundaries that such organizations must follow. The articles also highlighted a stark contrast between newcomers like Jake's family and longtime residents, especially in how rules were applied and how people were treated. Many readers expressed sympathy for those oppressed, angered by the long-standing injustice that few had dared to speak about before. The media attention placed heavy pressure on the HOA leadership and Karen Wellington personally. Within the Willowridge community, the articles were shared widely, fueling discussions and debates. Some residents who had previously stayed silent began to speak up, attending meetings and proposing reforms to build a more transparent and just system of governance. Social media is filled with personal stories and posts, creating a powerful movement from within the neighborhood. Karen and the HOA board could no longer avoid the pressure from the public and the media. They began launching defensive responses by holding press conferences, trying to calm public opinion and deny the allegations. But each explanation only deepened public suspicion about the transparency and ethics of how the HOA operated. The controversy kept growing, no longer just a neighborhood issue but a topic of broader concern. Jake's family and their supporters recognized the power of media and public attention to make a difference. They used the spreading articles and viral videos to raise awareness about civil rights while laying the groundwork for the next legal actions to seek justice. Every effort was executed methodically, strategically, and with unwavering determination. From multiple perspectives, the story of Willowridge began to unfold, layer by layer, revealing a complete picture of a power system walking a fine line between legality and oppression. This exposure didn't just force abusers to back down, but also awakened courage within the community, pushing people to stand up for a more just future. Skyler continued to remain silent in interviews and media appearances, not wanting her words to dilute the strength of the truth and the evidence. She chose to let her actions and resolve speak for her. The image of her holding a tactical firearm with a calm, cold expression became a symbol of resilience and defiance, inspiring thousands fighting for their own rights across the country. The unveiling of the truth was no longer a personal matter but proof of what a united community could do when it raised its voice against oppression. Willowridge had transformed from a quiet residential area into a symbol of those brave enough to demand fairness, respect, and accountability. Under growing pressure from the media and the public, authorities began taking stronger steps to investigate and address violations within the HOA. These developments brought renewed hope and trust for Jake, Skyler, and those standing with them. The video capturing the moment Skyler pulled her tactical weapon and firmly ordered Rick to lower his gun spread rapidly across social media platforms, becoming an emblem of fierce resistance against abuse of power. The clip not only drew massive attention online but also resonated with civil rights and human rights organizations. They quickly shared, analyzed, and voiced their support for Jake and Skyler's family, seeing it as living proof that citizens must not remain silent in the face of unlawful threats and oppression. The video's viral reach mobilized civil society groups, human rights activists, and civil rights attorneys to join the cause, providing legal, media, and emotional support to the family and the Willowridge community. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the area grew more intense than ever as many residents began to recognize long-standing flaws and contradictions in how the HOA board operated. Heated discussions and debates about rights, responsibilities, and transparency in community management unfolded constantly across group chats, forums, and in-person gatherings. Many people voiced their opposition to how the HOA handled the incident, arguing that the board had abused its power to oppress and discriminate, harming the rightful interests of new residents and the community at large. The growing consensus led many residents to shed their fear and silence toward the one-sided policies they had endured for years. Calls to reform procedures, restructure the HOA board, and build a more transparent democratic system became the focus of meetings and community efforts. They demanded a thorough review of the regulations, stricter oversight of the board's authority, and equal opportunity for all residents to have a voice and for their rights to be protected. The shift in mindset and action among the residents created significant pressure on the HOA board, forcing them to face reality and respond. Some board members began to realize that silence and cover-ups could not sustain their power, that abuse and imposition only fueled resistance and eroded trust within the community. A few within the board began pushing for internal reforms, though public pressure and scrutiny from social organizations remained relentless. During neighborhood meetings, many residents began sharing their own stories, recounting instances of unjust fines, excessive surveillance, and discriminatory actions they had long endured in silence. These personal accounts not only deepened mutual understanding but also painted a broader picture of systemic injustice over the years. Together, they discussed ways to reorganize the community, form independent oversight groups, and call for legal intervention to ensure everyone's rights were upheld. Skyler and Jake became key figures in this movement, frequently attending gatherings to share their experiences and inspire others. They were not just living proof of injustice, but also symbols of the relentless pursuit of justice and civil rights. Despite facing pressure and resistance from entrenched powers, they remained steadfast and resolute, sending a powerful message that silence is never an option for those seeking change. The light of justice and transformation grew brighter in Willowridge, a place once seen as a symbol of oppression, now emerging as a beacon for those who believe in the power of unity and fairness. The ripple effect of their story led many other neighborhoods across the nation to reevaluate their own governance, sparking an unstoppable wave of change in protecting rights and building communities that are fair, humane, and accountable. In the days that followed, the power of the community and the widespread support for Jake and Skyler's family continued to grow. Law enforcement agencies began to take a closer look, expanding their investigations and holding ongoing meetings with the HOA board. External pressure, combined with internal momentum from within the community, created a powerful collective force that pushed those in power to reassess their actions and consider decisive changes. Skyler remained steadfast, uninterested in fame or attention, devoting all her energy to the fight for justice for herself and those around her. Her family became a solid foundation, always standing by her side and helping her face every challenge. A belief in a better future was beginning to take shape, even though the road ahead remained uncertain, filled with obstacles and unknown trials. In the days following the public uproar, Karen Wellington began to feel the mounting pressure from both the community and the legal system slipping beyond her control. She quickly called an emergency meeting with the entire HOA board in the large conference room at the Willowridge headquarters. The soft yellow ceiling lights shone down on tense faces as Karen stood in the center, her voice sharp with urgency. "We must quickly find a way to respond to the pressure coming at us. If we don't act in time, our position will be seriously threatened." Her words rang like a warning bell, and everyone in the room felt the gravity of the situation. During the meeting, Karen proposed stricter measures to tighten security, increase oversight of new residents, and control media exposure to limit the spread of negative information. She emphasized the need to protect the image of the board and the HOA, insisting that all current rules and security protocols were legally grounded and aimed at maintaining order and safety across the neighborhood. However, not all members agreed with this approach. Some began expressing doubts and questioning the legality and true effectiveness of these measures, especially when such policies resulted in intimidation and harm to residents. Tension escalated as several board members voiced concerns that Karen's handling of the situation might be worsening the crisis. They feared that her excessive rigidity and lack of transparency could erode community trust and provoke backlash. These concerns gained traction, with more attendees nodding in agreement, revealing a clear internal rift within the HOA leadership. Some proposed reevaluating the current security policies and exploring more constructive and reasonable solutions to restore peace within the community. Karen, though aware of the growing dissent, clung to her authority and position. She urged board members to remain united and not allow outside troublemakers to exploit the chaos and damage the HOA's reputation. But deep down, she couldn't shake off a growing sense of unease and uncertainty about the challenges ahead. The meeting ended under a heavy cloud, as everyone left knowing that external pressure and internal division now posed the greatest threat to Karen's leadership. Outside the meeting room, Willowridge residents seemed to sense the shift in the neighborhood atmosphere. Conversations grew livelier, and resident groups began planning private gatherings to discuss the community's future. News articles and social media posts continued to expose the HOA's internal issues, further increasing pressure on the board. Meanwhile, Jake and Skyler remained steadfast in their journey, receiving growing support from organizations and residents alike. The internal crisis within the HOA showed no signs of easing, and instead grew more complicated, forcing Karen and the the management board to confront unavoidable challenges. The story of Willowridge, which began as a confrontation between two individuals, had now become a symbol of transformation and the fight for justice within a modern residential community. The attorney representing Jake's family swiftly initiated legal procedures to protect their client's rights. They filed an official lawsuit with the court, accusing the Willowridge HOA board of armed threats and discriminatory practices, while also demanding compensation for emotional damages suffered by Jake and Skyler. The lawsuit clearly outlined the collected evidence, emphasizing the abuse of power and intimidation that not only endangered their safety but also caused severe psychological harm. The attorney asserted that neighborhood associations cannot be allowed to wield unchecked power, especially when it compromises individuals' right to live and to be treated equally. The story spread quickly, drawing significant attention in Willowridge and neighboring areas. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere grew more tense than ever, as a large number of residents gathered to voice their strong opposition to the current board, especially Karen Wellington. Many did not hesitate to call for her immediate resignation, seeing it as the first step toward restoring trust and harmony in the community. The chorus of dissent grew louder, fueled not only by the specific incident but also by long-standing frustration over past instances of authoritarianism and unfair treatment. During the meeting, many residents proposed a full review of the HOA's security operations, demanding transparency in recruitment, training, and oversight of the security staff. They stressed that real safety could only be achieved when power is closely monitored and cannot be abused. Heated debates broke out between supporters and opponents, creating a charged but necessary atmosphere to spark real change. Under continued pressure from residents and the progressing lawsuit, the HOA board began to realize that maintaining control through rigid policies or denial was no longer viable. Some members started discussing restructuring efforts, seeking ways to refresh the board's image and policies to prevent further damage. They understood that the loss of community trust and growing resistance could lead to serious consequences, not only in terms of reputation but also legally. In contrast, Jake's family could clearly feel the strength of support from the community and social organizations. They actively participated in outreach, advocacy, and worked closely with their legal team to ensure their voices were heard and their rights were protected. Despite facing constant challenges and pressure, they remained resolute, increasingly determined to push for comprehensive change within Willowridge. The lawsuit not only exposed individual wrongdoing but also revealed significant gaps in the oversight and governance of residential organizations in general. The case became a wake-up call for many neighborhoods, sparking movements demanding reform and greater transparency in HOA operations. Stories of abuse of power, discrimination, and lack of accountability began to surface, prompting many to reconsider how their communities are managed. Although tensions remained in Willowridge, the atmosphere began to shift positively as residents started standing up for their rights. They were no longer silent or willing to compromise with injustice, but instead responded with clarity, unity, and determination. This change not only supported Jake's family but also brought hope to the entire community for a more just and humane future. Meanwhile, Karen Wellington became increasingly isolated within the HOA board. The lawsuit and the strong reaction from residents severely diminished her credibility and influence. Pressure from both inside and outside the organization forced her to reconsider her position and strategy. Private discussions within the board began to reflect a growing desire for change to avoid more serious legal and social consequences. Jake and Skyler's family continued working closely with lawyers and civil rights organizations, prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They understood that the path to justice would be long and difficult, but they believed in the power of truth, persistence, and the support of the community. This story was not just a legal battle, but a symbol of a community awakening from oppression and unchecked authority. It sounded an alarm to all who hold power. They must be accountable to justice and the people, and they cannot impose or intimidate without consequences. The preliminary hearing opened in a courtroom packed with people, the heavy and tense atmosphere clearly visible on the faces of those present. Rick Brooks stood in the defendant's box, facing charges of unlawful armed threat. His defense attorney stepped up to the stand, speaking in a low voice, trying to argue that Rick was only following instructions from the HOA board, aiming to maintain order in the neighborhood. They stated that Rick had been trained through internal procedures and had no real intent to harm anyone. The lawyer also emphasized that Rick never pulled the trigger, pointing to his restraint in a high-stress situation. Meanwhile, Jake's family had meticulously prepared their presentation. Alongside their legal team, they presented compelling evidence, including video video footage of the entire confrontation, capturing every tense action and word between Rick and Skyler. Witness testimonies, including those of neighbors who saw the incident and security experts, were delivered in detail, describing Rick's excessive threats and the serious psychological impact on Jake's family. The courtroom fell silent as the videos played, showing Skyler standing tall, composed, while Rick raised his gun in a threatening manner, with everyone watching intently. The story had become more than a personal incident. It was now a powerful illustration of abuse of authority within community management organizations and the serious consequences such abuse has on civil rights. Honest witness statements helped clarify the situation and exposed flaws in the HOA's hiring and oversight of security staff. Everyone involved in the hearing understood the broader significance of the case not only for Rick or Jake's family, but for the entire Willowridge community and similar neighborhoods. The presiding judge maintained a serious tone, demanding full disclosure of evidence from both sides and ensuring that the trial remained fair and transparent. The hearing stretched over many hours, with sharp questions aimed at determining the extent of Rick's responsibility and the HOA board's role in the misconduct. Both Jake and Skyler were present in court, maintaining a calm and resolute demeanor despite intense pressure from all sides. They knew this was a critical first step in exposing the truth and reclaiming justice. Their brief but powerful statements reflected a clear refusal to accept unlawful actions and prolonged injustice in their community. The family's legal representatives spoke with clarity and precision about the harm Rick's actions had caused, from the threat itself to the emotional trauma they endured. They stressed that this case could not be minimized and urged the court to impose a strong penalty, both to deter similar behavior in the future and to send a strong message about protecting civil rights in residential communities. Meanwhile, the defense attorney continued trying to protect Rick by emphasizing the regulations and authority granted by the HOA, but those arguments gradually lost credibility in the face of concrete evidence and consistent testimony from Jake's family and witnesses. Tension in the courtroom escalated as both sides engaged in intense debate, with every statement and piece of evidence weighed carefully. The events of the trial were quickly reported by local media, drawing attention from the public and human rights organizations. They saw it as an opportunity to push for change in how community organizations are managed and to warn against the risks of misused power. Positive reactions from the public and advocacy groups created significant pressure, helping ensure the trial proceeded with greater seriousness and fairness. Jake and Skyler continued to receive moral and legal support from many sides. They knew the legal battle still held many challenges, but the initial steps in court had brought meaningful hope for justice and for the protection of their rights and those of the broader community. Their perseverance and courage inspired many others who were also facing injustice. The preliminary hearing concluded with the judge promising a thorough review of all evidence and a commitment to delivering the fairest ruling possible. While the final verdict remained pending, it was clear that the truth had begun to surface, and those who had abused power would no longer be able to act without legal consequence. Skyler stood before the court, her gaze cold and her demeanor firm, commanding the full attention of the room. She had been summoned as a key witness, with the weight of recounting the entire event resting on her shoulders. With a clear, steady voice, Skyler described every detail of Rick Brooks pulling his gun and raising it to threaten her. She left out nothing from the panic in Rick's eyes that still held defiance, to her own remarkable calm in the face of danger. The honesty in her testimony caused everyone in the courtroom, including the judge and the defense, to pause, listen, and even express astonishment at her composure. She recounted every word Rick shouted, every trembling motion of his hand as he held the weapon, and how she had to respond with absolute calm to protect herself and her family. Skyler did not hide the depth of her emotions in that moment, the fear controlled through discipline, her faith in the law, and the weight of her duty as a federal officer. Every part of her story painted a vivid and convincing picture of what had happened, powerful enough to make the truth undeniable. Skyler answered the lawyers' and judges' questions with firmness and intelligence, never avoiding or hiding any detail. Her testimony was not only a key piece of evidence in the trial, but also a testament to the power of preparation, resilience, and unwavering will in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. She became a symbol of justice and courage, not only within Willowridge but far beyond. The trial continued with intense developments and heated debates between all parties involved, but Skyler's story remained the focal point of attention. The sincerity and bravery in her testimony helped clarify the events, exposing serious misconduct and injustice in the way Rick and the HOA board handled the situation. It marked a pivotal turning point in the trial, setting the stage for promising developments ahead. As the session concluded, the judge made a solemn promise to everyone present to thoroughly examine all the evidence and testimonies. He assured that his verdict would be fair and based on truth and the law, free from any outside pressure. This promise filled the courtroom with hope, and renewed confidence in justice for Jake, Skyler, and those who stood with them. Everyone left with different emotions but shared a common belief that the truth would prevail and justice would be served. Within each person who attended the trial, especially Skyler, the desire to live in a fair community that respects individual rights grew stronger. She knew this trial was not the end, but merely a critical step in the long journey toward justice for herself and others. The evening sun slowly faded, casting its final rays through the courtroom window. Skyler stepped outside, her eyes still steady and composed. She knew her responsibilities were far from over, but her heart was full of hope that today's efforts would help pave the way for a better tomorrow, not only for herself but for the entire Willowridge community. The process was still unfolding, but the signs of justice had never been clearer. As the investigation dragged on, the truth began to pierce through the thick veil of secrecy inside the Willowridge HOA Board of Directors. A former board member, who had long been involved in the HOA's operations, unexpectedly came forward. He contacted a local newspaper and handed over a set of internal records containing documents never before made public. These papers included strategic plans, meeting minutes, and directives aimed at new residents, revealing policies designed to tighten control and restrict the rights of those who had recently moved into Willowridge. The documents showed that the HOA board not only enforced strict regulations but also frequently used coercive measures that went beyond legal boundaries. There were cases where residents were fined for vague reasons, such as disrupting the landscape or violating noise rules without clear evidence. These actions not only made new residents feel isolated but also raised concerns about possible discrimination based on origin or skin color, particularly targeting families who were not part of the long-established community. The leaked records also revealed that the recruitment and training of security personnel were poorly managed, lacking transparency, and failing to meet necessary professional standards. This allowed abusive and even illegal behaviors to occur unchecked, with the HOA board appearing either unwilling or unable to enforce proper oversight. Internal reports exposed a pattern of cover-ups and neglect, all to preserve the board's power and public image. News of the internal documents spread quickly, causing shock throughout the Willowridge community and attracting attention from the media and social organizations. People began to realize the seriousness of the issues within the HOA's operations and called on authorities to expand investigations and take action. Residents, especially those who had been mistreated, felt empowered and encouraged to speak out, demanding real and lasting reform. The HOA board itself began to unravel under the pressure of the revelations. Some members felt betrayed and feared potential legal consequences, while others remained defiant in defense of the existing system. This internal split weakened the board's unity and eroded its credibility and authority in the eyes of the community. Amid the tension, public forums and neighborhood meetings were held to search for solutions and propose reforms. Residents participated with a shared desire to build a management system that was fairer, more transparent, and respectful of everyone's rights, regardless of how long they had lived in the neighborhood or any other distinction. Proposals included establishing independent oversight committees, reviewing the entire hiring and training process for security staff, and making disciplinary actions publicly accountable. Jake and Skyler's family remained powerful voices and key figures in the movement for change. They worked with civil rights organizations to campaign and communicate broadly, creating undeniable pressure on the HOA board and involved individuals. Their perseverance and courage not only brought attention to the Willowridge story but also helped drive reform in residential management practices on a broader scale. In response to mounting revelations and community pressure, authorities began taking more aggressive action, conducting inspections, audits, and in-depth investigations into the HOA's operations. Several corrective measures and proposed changes were introduced to ensure residents' rights would be protected and that abuse of power would no longer be tolerated. The crisis in the Willowridge HOA had grown far beyond the story of one family or one neighborhood. It had become a symbol of a broader societal issue, where unchecked power leads to injustice and suffering for many. This event marked a critical turning point in pushing for necessary reforms and laying the groundwork for a fairer, more civil society. While changes were still underway, Willowridge residents gradually realized that true power didn't lie in the authority they had endured, but in their own unity and willingness to speak up. The story of Jake and Skyler continued to inspire, showing many that standing up for justice was not only necessary but capable of changing the status quo. Karen Wellington received an official notice from an independent investigative agency, requiring her cooperation to clarify her role in authorizing the Willowridge security team, particularly Officer Rick Brooks. Pressure from leaked evidence and internal records made it impossible for Karen to ignore the summons. She was forced to participate in sessions with investigators who questioned her extensively about the selection, training, and oversight of security personnel, as well as decisions related to neighborhood safety. Despite her efforts to defend her actions and justify her leadership, Karen could not deny the increasingly evident truth that security management in the community had crossed legal boundaries and caused serious harm to residents. Meanwhile, Willowridge residents refused to remain passive amid escalating developments. They began organizing private meetings, where active members of the community came together to draft a reform proposal for the HOA to reshape its operations and increase transparency and accountability. These gatherings became spaces for sharing ideas and proposing measures to check the board's power, protect resident rights, and prevent future abuses. Everyone understood that real change required consensus and collective action to monitor power and ensure it was never misused again. The private meetings also played a key role in strengthening unity among residents who had once been divided by conflicts and disagreements. Now, they realized that only by standing together could they effectively fight and protect the community from forces seeking to maintain power through authoritarian means. This collaboration marked a major step forward in the pursuit of justice and fairness for Willowridge. Karen's summons to work with the independent investigative agency added even more pressure from the community and social organizations. They continued to closely monitor the investigation while demanding that authorities take firm action against the HOA's violations, protect the residents' rights, and restore trust within the community. This pressure helped push the agencies involved to operate more transparently and objectively, paving the way for a fair and lawful outcome. While the case remained under investigation, Karen grew increasingly isolated in the eyes of residents and the media. Discussions and debates about her role and responsibility intensified, forcing her to confront major challenges in maintaining her position and influence. She began to reflect on her past decisions and actions, preparing herself for the potential legal and social consequences ahead. With support from outside organizations, the Willowridge community was steadily building a new future, where residents' rights were prioritized and management bodies held to stricter oversight. They believed that only through unity, transparency, and fairness could they create a healthy, sustainable living environment. In response to clear evidence of abuse of power and serious mismanagement by the Willowridge HOA board, human rights organizations swiftly took action, working closely with local authorities to call for a full review of homeowners associations across the state. This was not just a reaction to what happened in Willowridge, but a proactive step to prevent similar situations in other communities. Rigorous inspections and audits were launched to assess legal compliance, transparency, and accountability in how these organizations operate. The review extended beyond internal regulations to include security policies, hiring practices, and how resident complaints were handled. Pressure from human rights groups and government agencies brought a fresh wave of reform, driving transparency and fairness across HOAs statewide. At the same time, a widespread fundraising and media campaign was launched to support Jake's family and other victims of similar abuse. The campaign gained attention not only from the local community but also from civil society groups and national and international human rights organizations. Its goal was to provide legal, emotional, and financial support to those affected, equipping them with the resources to continue fighting for their rights. Social media became a powerful tool to spread awareness, generate empathy, and spotlight the broader issue of unchecked power in residential communities. Personal stories, photos, and videos featuring families like Jake's were widely shared, stirring public emotion and prompting collective action. The collaboration between human rights organizations and local government not only boosted the effectiveness of oversight and enforcement efforts, but also helped rebuild public trust in the legal system and responsible authorities. Joint meetings, public forums, and media outreach campaigns were held continuously to raise awareness about civic rights, responsibilities, and the role of residents in shaping their communities. As a result, communities became more engaged and proactive in protecting themselves and pushing for necessary reforms in HOA management. Amid this momentum, Jake's family received strong and consistent support from all sides. Human rights groups, legal advocates, and nonprofit organizations remained in close contact, offering legal advice and helping to keep the issue in the public eye, increasing pressure on the HOA board and those involved. This solidarity empowered Jake and Skyler on their path toward justice, ensuring they didn't face these challenges alone. Together with the community, they helped spark a powerful movement that is shifting public awareness and behavior. Through it all, the coordinated efforts of civil society and government began to shape a broader transformation in how communities are governed. What started as a personal ordeal became a catalyst for long overdue change, proving that collective action and determined resistance can protect rights, correct injustice, and build stronger, more accountable neighborhoods. At community meetings, more residents began actively participating, sharing opinions and proposing solutions to build a fair, safe, and respectful living environment. The incident at Willowridge became a wake-up call for many other neighborhoods, sparking awareness of civic rights and social responsibility. Changes began to take shape, not only in management policies but also in residents' attitudes and how they treated one another, moving toward a more united and sustainable community. Meanwhile, local authorities stepped up enforcement measures and pushed for stronger legal frameworks to regulate the activities of residential organizations. New regulations were proposed to ensure that power is exercised appropriately, transparently, and without infringing on residents' rights. This marked a significant step forward in protecting civil rights and maintaining social order amid rapid urbanization and development. The coordinated efforts between the community and government created a positive precedent, affirming that the voices of the people cannot be ignored and their rights must be taken seriously. Willowridge, once considered a quiet neighborhood, became a symbol of transformation, proof of the power of unity, and the determination to fight for justice. Many Willowridge residents became more aware of their rights and the need to defend them against abuse of power and unfair treatment. They actively participated in training sessions hosted by social organizations and human rights advocacy groups, aiming to improve their understanding of civil rights, the law, and how to respond in situations involving threats or discrimination. These trainings not only provided legal knowledge but also empowered people to protect themselves, organize, and build a community based on mutual respect. As a result, residents gradually developed a proactive mindset, learning to use legal tools and communication skills to confront rights violations and create a strong, united community. In addition, the attorney representing Jake's family announced a comprehensive legal reform plan targeting HOA management and operations across the state. The plan includes proposing stricter regulations on the recruitment, training, and oversight of security personnel, as well as procedures for handling resident complaints. The main objective is to minimize abuse of power, protect citizens' legal rights, and promote transparency in community governance. The attorney also pledged to support residents with legal and media advocacy to apply the necessary pressure and ensure HOAs comply strictly with the new rules. The litigation plan quickly gained widespread attention from the community and social organizations. It marked not only a turning point for Willowridge but also a strong signal for other residential communities facing similar issues. Broad consensus and support from various parties created enough pressure to push lawmakers and local authorities to review, adjust, and enact new policies aimed at protecting residents' rights more effectively. As a result, Willowridge residents felt empowered and more confident in their ability to change their community's reality. No longer passive or disheartened by injustice, they became more proactive, engaging in social, legal, and media efforts to fight for fairness. These actions not only defended their own families but also contributed to building a safer, more transparent, and humane living environment for everyone. Meanwhile, the changes and pressure from the community prompted other HOA organizations to reevaluate their operations and responsibilities. They began initiating staff training programs, restructuring oversight procedures, and making their activities more transparent in an effort to rebuild trust with residents. This not only reduced incidents of abuse of power but also encouraged sustainable and harmonious development in modern residential communities. Faced with mounting pressure from public opinion and rights advocacy groups, the court quickly issued a temporary injunction against all enforcement actions by the Willowridge HOA board targeting Jake's family. The order took effect immediately and would remain in place until the official trial concluded and a final ruling was made. The court's decision not only protected Jake's legal rights but also sent a clear message that any abuse of power would be stopped and dealt with seriously. This injunction eased the pressure and threats the family had been enduring, allowing them to resume a sense of normalcy while awaiting the legal outcome. Alongside these developments, the Willowridge HOA board underwent a major restructuring. Karen Wellington, the long-standing president, was temporarily suspended while the independent investigative agency continued its inquiry into her role in acts of overreach and mismanagement. The suspension was issued to ensure an objective, transparent investigation and to prevent any interference from the current board. New members began taking over leadership, carrying the heavy responsibility of restoring community trust and initiating necessary reforms to protect residents' rights. Karen's suspension and the management overhaul marked a pivotal shift in the struggle of Jake's family and the broader Willowridge community. It was a clear sign that the law had begun to speak up and step in when civil rights were violated. These actions helped ease tensions within the neighborhood and sparked meaningful change in how residential organizations operate, moving toward greater fairness and transparency. The Willowridge community received the news with a mix of relief, hope, and caution. Many residents viewed it as the first real result of their unity and persistent efforts alongside Jake's family. They hoped the new management would bring about real improvements, put an end to abuses of power, and help build a healthy, fair living environment for all. Community meetings grew livelier, with increased participation and constructive input, all focused on shaping a better future for Willowridge. At the same time, the court's intervention and leadership shakeup served as a wake-up call for other HOA organizations and similar communities nationwide. They were forced to reevaluate how they operate, the scope of their authority, and their accountability to avoid causing harm and facing backlash from residents. The Willowridge case became a powerful lesson on the importance of transparency, justice, and respect for civil rights in community management. Jake's family continued to receive support from the community, social organizations, and legal advocates. They remained steadfast in their efforts to protect their rights and push for necessary reforms that would make a lasting impact. The trust and strength drawn from solidarity helped them endure the hardships, becoming a source of inspiration for many others facing similar challenges. Although there were still many obstacles ahead, the first legal steps and the shift in HOA leadership opened up a new future for Willowridge, a future where civil rights are respected, fairness is upheld, and abuses of power have no place in the community. Standing before thousands gathered at the Willowridge Community Center, residents, media, and social organizations, the attorney representing Jake's family spoke with pride and conviction. This is not just a victory for Jake's family, but a triumph for every member of the community who has ever been oppressed, who has fought to reclaim their rights and justice. His words echoed through the crowd, striking a chord with those who continued working tirelessly to bring change. That speech not only acknowledged the efforts of Jake's family, but also became a rallying cry for others to rise and defend themselves against abuse and injustice. In this context, new policies regarding residents' rights began to be proposed and submitted at the state level for review and approval. These proposals focused not only on limiting the power of HOA boards, but also on promoting transparency in management, ensuring access to information, and granting residents the freedom to participate in decisions affecting their community life. The introduction of these policies marked a crucial step toward comprehensive reform, ensuring all residents are treated fairly, have a voice, and are protected under the law. This transformation signaled the beginning of a new era, one where the rights of individuals are prioritized and governing bodies operate under tighter oversight. Recruitment, training, and supervision of security staff, along with complaint handling procedures, were being restructured to prevent abuse and better safeguard residents' rights. At the same time, community education on civil rights and social responsibility was being expanded to raise awareness and encourage more active citizen involvement in local governance. This reform not only addressed the long-standing issues in Willowridge, but also set a precedent for other residential communities across the state and country. It reaffirmed that power must be restrained and held accountable by law, transparency, and community participation to prevent future wrongdoing and harm. The story of Jake, Skyler, and their fight for justice became a powerful symbol, helping to drive widespread change throughout society. In light of the initial positive outcomes, the Willowridge community clearly felt a shift in how the neighborhood was managed and operated. Changes within the HOA leadership, updates in policy, and the active participation of residents helped create a more civil, fair, and secure living environment. The voices of the people were no longer ignored but heard and respected, contributing to the foundation of a united and sustainably growing community. Jake and Skyler's family continued to stand as a symbol of strength through perseverance and courage. They remained committed to working alongside the community, social organizations, and legal advocates to uphold values of justice and humanity. Support from all sides gave them renewed strength to press forward on a long journey ahead, one where justice and truth would always be respected and enforced. The progress in legal reform and community governance marked a new beginning for Willowridge, bringing hope for a better future, one where every resident could live in a safe, equal, and respectful environment. It also served as clear proof of what a community can accomplish when it rises together to defend its rights, and as a lasting reminder that justice always requires perseverance, courage, and collective resolve. The first community meeting under the leadership of the new management board took place in an atmosphere both solemn and tense. In a small, neatly arranged room lit by warm yellow lights, the faces of Willowridge residents were clearly visible. Skyler stood quietly in a corner, saying nothing, her eyes focused intently on every development. Her silence was not indifference, but a sign of inner strength, a deep resolve reflected in every gesture and glance. Everyone in the room could feel the weight of the moment. The transition of power had marked a turning point, a new hope for a community long burdened by pressure and injustice under the previous board. Though Skyler said nothing, her presence served as a living symbol of change, of quiet but persuasive strength. The looks directed at her carried not just respect, but trust and belief in a more just future. Meanwhile, an elderly resident, who had spent his entire life in Willowridge, quietly said to the person beside him, "Some voices don't need to be spoken to make us change." That remark echoed like a message, reminding everyone that strength doesn't always come from loud words or grand gestures, but from the heavy silence of quiet endurance. It affirmed the spirit of resilience and the courage to remain standing through hardship and pressure. The subtle whispers and exchanged glances among residents showed they had begun to understand that real change comes not only from written policies or eloquent speeches, but from shifts in mindset and individual action. This meeting wasn't just another gathering, it was the beginning of a new journey where everyone worked together to rebuild trust and harmony in their community. Skyler, through her powerful silence, became the unspoken center of the meeting. She didn't need to argue or confront, she simply stood there, showing everyone that strength doesn't always need words. Her presence alone sent a message that justice and truth are always present, waiting to be ignited by courage and unity. Alongside her, reform plans, training programs, and workshops on civil rights were also discussed, helping the community better understand their rights and responsibilities. It was an opportunity to learn, grow, and ensure past mistakes would not be repeated. The spirit of unity and community commitment grew stronger with every word and every gesture. When the meeting ended, the room was filled with a silence that carried meaning. Everyone left with a renewed sense of belief in the positive change ahead. That heavy silence became the firm foundation for what comes next, helping Willowridge steadily move out of the shadow of abuse and injustice. Jake stood silently, watching his daughter, his eyes filled with gratitude and respect for the way she had chosen to face the challenge. Skyler didn't need to shout or use violence to prove her strength, nor did she need harsh words to respond to oppression. Her quiet resilience became a message more powerful than any speech. Jake understood that it was this calm demeanor that was true strength, the only way to stay grounded and inspire an entire community. Not far away, a mural painted near the children's playground had become a vivid symbol of the Willowridge story. The image of a girl standing tall, calmly holding a firearm with undeniable authority, captured the attention of everyone passing by. The mural didn't just capture a historic moment, it conveyed a deep message of resilience and courage. It served as a reminder that, despite life's pressures and challenges, anyone can stand firm, preserve their dignity, and fight for justice through their inner strength. Skyler's story became a source of inspiration and motivation, encouraging others to keep pushing through hardship and strive for a more just and humane community. After the turmoil and prolonged struggle in Willowridge, the surrounding residential communities began to show clear changes in how they were managed and operated. The event served as a wake-up call, prompting many neighborhoods in the region to hold transparent meetings with wide participation from residents. People no longer accepted power being concentrated in the hands of a few individuals or small groups, demanding instead clear oversight, accountability, and consensus in decisions affecting community life. These meetings became open forums where every opinion was heard and respected, marking a major step forward in building residential communities grounded in democracy and fairness. Eliminating personalized power within HOA organizations became a top priority. Neighborhoods began reviewing their entire administrative structures, replacing individuals showing signs of abuse with more responsible and dedicated members. They established strict selection and oversight processes, along with independent committees to monitor the management board's activities, ensuring that the rights of all residents were protected equally and transparently. These policies not only changed how things operated, but also raised community awareness about each member's role and responsibility in safeguarding the shared living environment. At the same time, a large-scale social study was published, titled The Willowridge Event, A New Era in Civil Rights and Local Power Accountability. This study offered a deep analysis of the impact the civil resistance in Willowridge had on residents' awareness and behavior throughout the state. Results showed the event not only transformed how residential organizations were managed, but also significantly elevated public awareness of civic rights and responsibilities, motivating greater participation in social and local political activities. The research also indicated that increasing transparency and oversight of local power helped reduce abuses and violations, thereby improving residents' quality of life and overall satisfaction. These changes went beyond the neighborhood level, triggering a positive wave across the state and laying the groundwork for a more just and democratic society. Policymakers began applying the lessons from Willowridge in drafting new regulations to better control power in community organizations and enhance the role of the public in local governance. This transformation gradually erased the old system rooted in personalized authority and injustice. In its place, a new governance model emerged, centered on the people and valuing participation, transparency, and accountability. The community was no longer a place of imposition, but a space where members collectively built and protected their shared rights. Unity and collective awareness were awakened more powerfully than ever, forming a durable force for the future. The values of fairness and transparency are gradually spreading across residential communities, helping to improve the relationship between management boards and residents while promoting the sustainable development of urban neighborhoods. The stories of Willowridge have become a source of inspiration for many other places, serving as proof of the power of change that comes from public awareness and action. Through this, people realize that power is not meant to dominate but to serve, protect, and enhance community life. Skyler and the Jake family have become living symbols of these efforts. They are not just the ones who changed Willowridge but also helped usher in a new era of civil rights and community governance. Their story is retold again and again as evidence of the strength of perseverance, courage, and solidarity in the fight for justice and social fairness. Those who had long remained silent in the Willowridge community began to speak up, sharing personal experiences of injustice and oppression they had endured. They talked about being overregulated, subjected to unreasonable rules, and feeling excluded simply because they were different or didn't belong to the old power circle. These honest stories not only helped break down psychological barriers but also fostered connection, encouraging everyone to build a community based on mutual respect and fairness. In doing so, residents were no longer just fighting for their own rights but aiming for collective progress, helping shape a more civil, united, and humane living environment. This shift in mindset and action among residents brought new energy to Willowridge, breaking down the previous walls of silence and hesitation. Meetings, discussions, and community activities became more vibrant, helping everyone better understand their rights, responsibilities, and the strength of unity. It also became a way to express resistance against abuse of power, assert civil rights, and show a genuine desire for equal living conditions. As the community gradually rose up, Karen Wellington, the former symbol of power in the Willowridge HOA, slowly disappeared from social media. She left behind a short but meaningful message: "Times have changed. I need to learn to stand within the law." The message felt like a quiet admission of past mistakes and a realization that power must never stand outside the law or community oversight. Her withdrawal brought relief to many in the neighborhood, but also served as a reminder that real change takes time and continuous effort. Karen's absence online left a power vacuum that the new management board began to fill with more transparent and open policies. The Willowridge community started to notice real differences in leadership style and slowly regained trust in the future. The story of Willowridge stands as a powerful testament to the change sparked by those who dare to speak up, break the silence, and build a fair and civilized community. Amid the vibrant atmosphere of change in Willowridge, a civic education class was held for neighborhood children. There, the kids not only learned about legal regulations but were also inspired by the values of fairness, respect, and social responsibility. One young student, eyes bright and full of awareness, sat beside his mother and suddenly said, "I get it now. Justice isn't just about laws or what's written on paper, it's about how we treat and respect each other every day." That simple yet profound statement left his mother speechless with emotion, realizing that the most fundamental values of justice lie in understanding and empathy between people. The classroom became a warm and hopeful space, where young eyes were opened for the first time to see a more just world, a society where everyone is respected and has a voice. These lessons not only provided knowledge but also sparked belief in the power of perseverance, courage, and unity. As a result, the younger generation was better prepared to become responsible citizens, capable of protecting their rights and those of their community in the future. Around the same time, a mother in the neighborhood who had suffered greatly under the harsh rule of the old HOA sent a heartfelt thank you to Skyler. She said that the young woman's calm, determination, and careful preparation had shown them that change doesn't require violence or harsh words. That patience and inner strength became a shining example, inspiring many to find their own voice and the courage to stand up for their rightful claims. Her message of thanks was not just personal gratitude but the echo of an awakened community, affirming the strength of unity and belief in justice. The story of Skyler and the changes in Willowridge had touched every corner of the neighborhood, gradually shifting how people viewed power, fairness, and social responsibility. Each opened eye reflected not just understanding, but belief in the possibility of building a better community. Residents of Willowridge began to realize that justice wasn't something distant, but something found in how they treated each other, in daily empathy and mutual respect. These classes, conversations, and subtle shifts in thinking helped ease long-held wounds, creating a renewed space of hope and vitality in Willowridge. The community was no longer just a place to live, but a place for individuals to grow, mature, and build a shared future. Those bright, awakened eyes stood as proof of a new beginning, of awakening, and of deep transformation within each resident. Skyler, though not one for many words, had become a symbol of the power of silence and unwavering resolve. She wasn't just someone who stood up against injustice, but someone who inspired a future generation. The eyes opened among children and families throughout Willowridge were the result of her steady and persistent fight, opening a new chapter for the community, one built on fairness, respect, and harmony. Skyler began teaching leadership and crisis management workshops for the Willowridge community and surrounding neighborhoods. She drew on her experience and professional expertise to help residents better understand their civil rights, how to handle oppression and abuse of power, and how to develop leadership skills within their communities. Her training sessions focused not only on crisis response, but also emphasized the importance of perseverance, resilience, and solidarity. As people joined the courses, they gradually became more confident, learned how to protect their rights, and took an active role in driving positive change in their communities. Though Skyler never sought attention or self-promotion, her sharp gaze and calm demeanor left a lasting impression on everyone who met her or followed her journey. The way she embodied silent strength became a powerful lesson in determination and preparation in the face of challenge. Her silence was not avoidance. It was a deliberate and powerful message about inner strength and commitment, showing others that real change doesn't require shouting or violence. Through these training programs, Skyler became a source of inspiration, not only for Willowridge residents, but also for other communities facing similar struggles. She shared more than just knowledge. She instilled confidence and encouraged people to stand up for their rights and dignity. Her teachings spread widely, shifting mindsets and behaviors, helping build stronger and more united communities. Skyler's role as a teacher and motivator marked a new chapter for Willowridge, symbolizing a transformation from oppression and injustice to a spirit of freedom, equality, and shared purpose. Her story remains a vivid testament to the power of courage and persistence in driving lasting social change. At a key hearing at the state Supreme Court, the Willowridge case was presented as a prime example of the consequences of unchecked power within HOA organizations. Judges and legal scholars conducted a thorough analysis of how authority is granted and exercised in residential communities, and the harmful effects when that power is not properly regulated. They concluded that the Willowridge case was not just a family matter but a valuable legal lesson, paving the way for legislative reforms aimed at preventing similar abuses in the future. During the discussion, many legal and sociological experts agreed that systemic change begins with individuals who have the strength to stand firm without resorting to violence, even when directly threatened. They emphasized the power of persistence, intentional silence, and composure in the face of pressure and danger. It was people like Skyler who had the most profound impact, showing that real power does not lie in aggression or force, but in wisdom and self-control, inspiring communities to become more conscious and act more justly. The hearing extended beyond legal analysis to propose practical solutions for increasing oversight, transparency, and accountability in residential organizations. The consensus was that a more balanced legal framework was needed to protect residents' rights while limiting excessive concentration of power in the hands of a few. This was seen as a vital foundation for building civil, fair, and cohesive communities. The Willowridge incident, once a personal ordeal, became a catalyst for reshaping social perceptions of authority and justice. It demonstrated that truth and rights can be defended without violence, and that real strength lies in wisdom, persistence, and courage. As a result, many other communities began reassessing their own structures and governance, sparking a widespread wave of reform. Jake and Skyler were invited to speak at numerous civil rights conferences across the state and the nation. They shared their firsthand experiences of unwavering resistance, delivering powerful inspiration to those facing oppression and injustice. Through each speech, they conveyed not just their personal story, but a message about the strength of perseverance, bravery, and the importance of understanding one's rights. Audiences listened intently, deeply moved by the sincerity and force behind their words, making their story a symbol of hope and positive change. In a brief yet powerful speech, Skyler emphasized, "The gun was never fired, but that silence was the loudest shot." Her words brought the entire room to silence, as everyone understood that true strength does not lie in violent action but in resolve, courage, and careful preparation when standing up against oppression. Her silence and unwavering stance were not just a form of resistance but a powerful symbol for anyone facing similar challenges. Through their words, Jake and Skyler helped many realize that justice does not come from individual strength alone, but from unity, enduring willpower, and self-control. They became a source of motivation, inspiring the community to grow more aware of their civil rights, to take initiative in the fight, and to help build a more just society. The sign with the bold words, "You messed with the wrong one," that once stood tall in front of Jake's home had now been taken down. No one felt the need to put it back up, because that message no longer needed to be spoken through symbols. It had already been etched into the minds of Willowridge's residents. The sign was gone, but its power remained, reflected in the deep and lasting changes within the community. Everyone understood that the story of Skyler and Jake's family had become a powerful reminder of perseverance, courage, and unity in the fight against injustice and oppression. The Willowridge community began drafting a new Declaration of Rights and Mutual Respect, directly inspired by the struggle and values Skyler represented. This declaration was not just a legal document or administrative rule, but a symbol of the collective agreement among all residents to uphold civil rights, protect fairness, and build a safe, harmonious environment for everyone. Every member of the community was invited to participate, to contribute their voice and responsibility, so the declaration would serve as a guiding principle for future decisions and actions. Through neighborhood meetings, community discussions, and joint activities, the declaration was completed and became the foundation for education and training programs focused on civil rights, conflict resolution, and responding to oppression. The residents of Willowridge now not only understood their rights more clearly, but also knew how to exercise them effectively and responsibly. This shift in awareness and behavior created a united, resilient community, ready to stand up for one another in the face of any injustice. The absence of the sign, yet the strong presence of the spirit of resistance and the change in how neighbors live together, was clear proof of the power of perseverance and courage. The story of Skyler and Jake's family had become deeply rooted in people's hearts, a silent symbol for those who seek change and justice in everyday life. It was no longer just the story of one family, but of a community and a society awakening and moving toward a fairer future. Willowridge had now become a model for other neighborhoods, where rights are protected and mutual respect forms the foundation of all relationships. Residents understood that grand symbols weren't needed to show strength. Rather, unity, awareness, and concrete action were the best ways to protect and grow a community. The story ended with the maturity and transformation of an entire neighborhood, where promises of justice and respect had become reality, not distant, not abstract, but real and lived. The small statue erected near the central park of Willowridge became a resilient symbol of the neighborhood. The image of a girl standing tall, holding a gun without pulling the trigger, was crafted with subtlety, embodying strength and resolve in the face of adversity. The statue not only captured a historic moment, but also reminded residents of the power of silence, patience, and courage in the pursuit of justice. Everyone who came to the park paused to look at it as a way to honor and remember the values that Skyler and Jake's story had brought to the community. Their story ended with the image of Jake and Skyler standing by the park, looking toward the statue, their eyes calm yet filled with the depth of experience and lessons from their long fight. In that moment, they silently told themselves, "Some battles aren't meant to be won, but to change the world." The words echoed within, like a declaration of purpose, not just for themselves but for the future of the community and society. They understood that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the ability to shift perceptions and awaken conscience, creating lasting progress for the generations to come. The park became more than a place to play. It turned into a symbol of awakening and hope. Stories of resilience, fairness, and civil rights were passed down through each generation, reminding everyone that every individual has the power to make a difference. Willowridge was no longer a small, ordinary neighborhood, but a living testament to the power of change driven by brave actions and the steady perseverance of its people. The story of Jake and Skyler in Willowridge is a journey of persistence, courage, and unyielding resolve in the face of injustice and abuse of power. From the moment they moved in, they encountered prejudice, threats, and the irrational authority of the HOA leadership. The intense confrontation between Skyler and security guard Rick Brooks sparked a series of events that awakened the entire community and pushed them to rise up for fairness. With the support of neighbors, attorneys, and human rights organizations, they brought the case to light and helped change the way residential organizations are managed and held accountable. The legal and media battle not only helped Jake's family protect their rights, but also created a broad shift in how Willowridge residents thought and acted. The civic education classes, community meetings, and the creation of a new declaration on rights and mutual respect marked the growth and transformation of the entire neighborhood. The court's temporary injunction against enforcement actions and the suspension of Karen and Wellington signaled a major advancement in protecting civil rights and reining in unchecked power. Through that journey, people realized that true strength does not come from violence or harsh words, but from determination, thorough preparation, and unshakable inner strength. Skyler became a symbol of powerful silence, inspiring younger generations and the wider community about the value of perseverance and courage. The lessons she shared not only shifted perspectives but also awakened a wise and effective spirit of standing up for one's rights. The story also shows that a community is not just a place to live, but a space to grow and defend shared values. Unity, active participation, and mutual oversight form a solid foundation to prevent abuse of power and build a fair living environment. Willowridge, once a small neighborhood, became a symbol of the power of a community that wakes up and dares to stand up for itself. The greatest lesson this story offers is that no matter how big the challenge, anyone can make a difference if they hold on to belief, perseverance, and the support of their community. Change does not come from violence, but from the strength of wisdom and determination. This is a meaningful message for everyone, especially those fighting against injustice and abuse of power in their lives. Ultimately, the story of Jake and Skyler is a reminder that justice and truth must always be defended, and every struggle, no matter how small, holds great value and impact. It encourages each individual to be brave enough to stand up for themselves and for their community in order to build a more just, civilized, and humane society for both today and the future.